The most sickening feeling I got came from knowing the man must have been watching my house, waiting to see when I would come out and go for my daily jog just before dusk. I wondered how many days he had been watching me to know that the house would be empty at that time, and the window he used to break into my house would be optimal in that 20-minute sliver of time. It took me a few minutes to even figure out what happened when I got home. My heart was already pounding, my body coated with a cool sweat, and my mind racing before I even saw the broken window in my laundry room. Tucked in the far corner of the house with a floor-level window, it was the perfect entry point. I wondered if the intruder had already cased my house a couple of times, probably when I was still home or sleeping in the middle of the night. Not sure why he thought my house was a particularly attractive target. I have almost nothing of value, and I'm a very obviously modest person. What happened was a burglar broke into my house, stole some of my fake jewelry, and an old bottle of antibiotics, and a broken iPhone. All in all, the value of the loot taken was probably just over $100 tops. What they accomplished was shattering my soul and trust in the world more than anything else. As they say, the best things in life are free. After realizing what happened, I gave the rest of the house a quick look over as I talked to the 911 dispatcher and had him relay the cops towards my house and waited out front for them to arrive. Law enforcement didn't present me with any revelations I didn't already know. Someone broke in, stole some items, and ran out, all in about the span of just a few minutes while I was on my jog. They were going to keep eyes out and ears open for any clues, but that's about all they could do at the moment. At least a couple of them were nice enough to stick around and board up the broken window for me and recommend some cheaper but non-scary motels I could check into if I didn't want to stay in the house that night. Most kindly, one of the officers offered me a video security system he had, but didn't need anymore, that could be installed in about 20 minutes. He said it was basically a glorified baby monitor, but it was great to keep an eye on your place when you weren't there, and to place prominently next to your biggest floor-level window to scare off anyone sizing up the place. He ran home, brought it back, and hooked it up in my house while some other officers patched up the window. I thanked them for the repair work and turned down the motel idea. My boyfriend Jacob would be over in an hour or two, and that was enough to make me comfortable enough to stay in the house that night. I knew it was just some desperate tweaker, willing to bust in for $100 worth of stuff, and wouldn't come back again. The police confirmed as such. I just asked if one of them could park out front until my boyfriend got home, and they agreed. Jacob arrived around 9 p.m., and the night moved on. I told him all of the details, and he didn't seem to be particularly concerned. He agreed with my tweaker assessment and kept his hunting shotgun right next to my bed in case the person decided to come back. It wasn't easy, but I was eventually able to fall asleep. I got a few hours of the sweet embrace of slumber before the quick thumb of a text message sliding into my phone shook me awake. I groaned and walked to the bathroom to relieve myself. I forgot about the text by the time I got back to bed, and I didn't check it. I wish I had. I checked the text message first thing in the morning. It was from my mom. I had avoided telling her because I knew she would freak out and drive all the way from Sacramento in the middle of the night to comfort me, when all she would do was make me more scared. Apparently, Jacob had posted a photo of his shotgun resting next to the bed with a little bit of the story next to it. My mom saw it on social media and started texting me at 1 a.m. Her first text was actually very helpful, and something Jacob and I should have thought about the night before. I saw Jacob's post about what happened. I'm so sorry. Did you make sure the police checked every single inch of your house to make sure the guy isn't still there? My mom actually had a great point. I never even asked the cops how much they scoured the house. They just said he ran off sometime before I got home. and that was it. Jacob and I never did a great job of checking either. I woke up Jacob and told him we needed to search everywhere in the house. He was tired and unhappy, but agreed to do it, with shotgun in hand. What we found underneath my bathroom sink horrified me. There was a large cabinet directly underneath the sink in the bathroom, in my bedroom, about the size of a washing machine. I never even thought about it until now. I casually pulled the cabinet open, almost as an afterthought, and was immediately overtaken by the hideous scent of male BO. I started coughing, almost vomited, as I looked away and connected my eyes with Jacob, who had a look of alarm on his face that I had never seen before. I followed Jacob's eyes and the stench to the space below the sink, where I saw a filthy jean jacket, what looked like human excrement, and the bottle of pills which had been missing. We called the cops and had the house 100% searched. Nothing turned up, but the cop who gave me the video system pointed out that we should review the footage to see if it showed anything. Jacob and I watched the footage on my laptop with a few cops hanging over our shoulders. I was almost frozen in fear, despite the amount of armed men in the room whose job it was to protect me. We had set up 3 cameras, so we had 3 different shots that we could watch at once. One from my bathroom, one in my bedroom, and one in the living room, which feeds out into the front driveway of the house. I could feel the heart of even the largest cop in the room stop as we watched the footage. It started with the camera set up in my bedroom. The angle the camera provided showed my bathroom through the open door. The timestamp said it was just after 3 a.m. when movement finally started to happen while Jacob and I slept in our bed. We watched in horror as a dark figure of a man stretched himself out from underneath the bathroom sink and then took a moment to steady himself in the bathroom. He then slowly walked into our bedroom. The camera set up on my bed provided the perfect vantage point to see him as he walked right to my bed where Jacob and I were sleeping. We got the slightest glimpse of a round face encased by the hood of a sweatshirt. The man in the hood stopped right at the foot of our bed. He stood there for a good 20 seconds, staring at Jacob and I as we slept, and then he walked out of the bedroom door. We watched the intruder simply walk out the front door at that point. He even locked the front door on his way out. The whole thing had a slight feel of politeness to it, but it was in no way friendly. It would have been much better had the intruder rifled through all of my stuff, stolen my things. Almost even better if he had attacked me, hiding under the sink where I had brushed my teeth and washed my face just a few hours before, and then walking away long after I had gone to sleep, was the worst thing he could have done. The whole thing felt much more personal than opportunistic. Maybe that was his plan. I never stayed another night in that house. I moved a couple of towns over into a secure apartment building with heavy security, but still could never sleep easy at night, even if Jacob and his shotgun are by my side. I have done my best to fight through it. My apartment had a little compartment beneath the sink when I moved in. My first night in the new apartment, I had Jacob come over with tools from work and take the doors off. I feel a certain comfort each night when I am able to kick my feet into the now open space while I brush my teeth. It does just a little bit to calm my nerves, but I'll never quite be the same. So we're at this camper near Dover Lights in Arkansas. It's not the fanciest campsite, but we managed to find this guy that spends a lot of time out there while also working. So he just vacations in the woods half the year. The guy offers to let my friend watch the place while he goes to visit his son. My friend automatically invites me and some other people to come hang out, and we spend a few days there drinking, smoking, fishing, and just messing around. All in all, pretty okay, until my female friend gets super drunk and barges outside in the middle of the night, buck naked, to eat beans by the handful out of a cold pot. As someone who admires cleanliness, I follow her out to try and make sure she doesn't hurt herself, while everyone else just laughs. So there she is, covered in beans, and I'm trying to convince her to settle down and clean herself off with a towel, when suddenly, her head shoots up like a deer in headlights. She just glares at the trees around us. We're alone, and it's pitch black. She glares before literally growling and then sprinting into the woods. I have no idea what to do. I've completely lost sight of her, and she's naked in the woods by herself. A few failed attempts to call out to her, and I do the stupidest thing I could have done by following her. About 5 meters into the complete darkness, I look down and see a faint light from someone's phone. Picking it up, I see it's in camera mode, and there are pictures of us, very recent pictures, all in creepy night vision mode, with some looking like they were taken from the window of the camper, and the last one is of my friend running directly towards the camera. Realizing what happened, I delete the pictures and drop the phone on a rock, crushing the screen with my foot. Still unable to find her and freaking out, I double back to the camper for help, only to find her still very drunk in a lawn chair naked. Carrying her back inside, I let her boyfriend towel her off, and they both pass out spooning on the bottom bunk. I never told them what really happened, and she didn't remember in the morning. But I did lock the door and wake up every hour to just keep an eye on things. My brother and I would go to our dad's house for the weekend visit. It would be like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and we were about 10 and 6 years old. All of the sudden he would be like, "Let's go for a ride." So we would load into the Jeep and drive to some house that I didn't recognize and turn the Jeep off. He would tell my brother and I not to move and to not make any noise, and that he would be back. Then he would disappear for 30 minutes to an hour. The weirdest part, they were all different houses. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana, Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags and started out. The first day and night was amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. We started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" Of course I said yes, so she led me up on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those that you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries very quickly. Out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and the trees, so naturally I decided to follow the wire out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees and then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood, plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing. Just this outlet and this desk. I'm staring confused as all hell at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. It then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we were at had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around, and yet there was a live outlet. It was weird as hell. No spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone powered desk in the middle of the woods. There's an abandoned insane asylum in Northville, Michigan that my friends and I explored 3 times. This is the story of the 3rd time and the final time that we ever broke in. I still get chills every time I remember this night. The first 2 times we went, the asylum was actually more interesting than creepy to explore. Both times we happened to run into very friendly people there. The first time we ran into another group of high school kids. Scared the crap out of them at first. The second time, we met a couple stoner Vietnam vets that gave us a tour of the place. It's an entire complex complete with underground tunnels, a morgue, and lots of files and things from the 50s. This time, however, we were alone and only had 2 flashlights between 3 people. Much like the guy with the story about the World War II base, the echoing footsteps sound like they're coming from behind you, and always seem to take one more step after you stop. So after exploring much of the asylum like this and being considerably creeped out already, we decide to head to the main building. It's about 18 stories tall, and the view from the top is pretty cool because it's by far the tallest building anywhere remotely close, and you can see Detroit from up there. We're nearing the top of the seemingly endless stair corridor when the girl that's with us freezes and whispers for us to stop. I heard footsteps, she whispers. I tried to tell her it was just our footsteps echoing, but when both of them made me shut up and listen, I could hear it as clear as day. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the top floor. Now the building is tall, but very small area-wise, so we were very close to the sounds. Still standing on the stairs, we whisper amongst us about what we're going to do. My very stupid friend insists that it's probably just another friendly person and we should go up and say hello. I try to explain to him that you don't want to meet the kind of people that pace the top floor of an old asylum in the middle of the night. We couldn't convince him, and he goes to head upstairs, but I said screw this and just started running down the stairs. Fortunately, he followed us, and we got out of there without ever finding out who was walking around up there that night. To top it all off, a cop passing by on the road spotted us after coming out of the building, and we had to run into the asylum complex to get away. I still think back to that night sometimes, and wonder who was up there. There were definitely no guards, so it was probably either a gang of people or the tortured soul of a crazy person. Either way, it was way too close for comfort. I woke up from a nap to the sound of my girlfriend sobbing somewhere else in the house. I got up to see what was wrong, and determined that the sound was coming from downstairs. I followed the sound down the spiral staircase all the way to the finished basement. The sound was definitely coming from the little half bathroom at the bottom of the stairs that we rarely used. The door was closed, which it never was, and I couldn't see any light under the door, but the sound was very loud from the bottom of the stairs. It was about this time that I started to fully wake up and remembered my girlfriend had been leaving for the grocery store when I started my nap. I could see her parking spot from one of the basement windows. She wasn't home. I called her name, and the sobbing instantly stopped. The bathroom was empty when I finally got the courage to open the door. There used to be an abandoned rubber factory on the edge of my town before it was torn down a couple years back. I went there once and tried all the doors, but they were barred. But I did find a crack in the concrete wall around the back that was just big enough to slip through. The inside was really neat. There were abandoned boats that must have been in storage for decades, a bunch of old conveyor belts and factory equipment, all kinds of drug paraphernalia. I found a random painting of Jesus in a makeshift shrine, but that's not the creepy part. I was walking around this abandoned factory at about 8 p.m., just after dark. I look around for an hour or so, and aside from some old shit, there's really nothing out of the ordinary. Then I hear music start playing. Something sort of bluesy, somewhere in the factory. I'm not easily scared, and I kind of wanted to figure out what sort of freak was listening to old records in an abandoned factory, because honestly, that's something that I would do. I tracked down the noise after about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's in this room in the basement that has the doorway covered with a tarp. I go inside, and the room is a huge contrast from the rest of the dingy, dull, old factory. The walls were bright purple, and the room was warm, like there was a space heater in it, whereas the rest of the factory was freezing. There's a cassette player on the floor playing a song, which I later tracked down to be Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. But I never found out what the other songs were, and a bunch of papers taped to the walls that all say, "She gotta run, she gotta run, she gotta run." If I were to guess, there were at least 100 sheets that said the exact same phrase, just plastered on the walls and laying on the floor. There was a chair that looked like it had been detached from a school desk in the corner, and a statue of an animal that was really badly chipped and burned, like someone was trying to destroy it. There was also a stack of VHS tapes that had names of women on the sides. I only remember seeing Jessica on multiple tapes, but there were a few other names. I left shortly after because I got worried whoever owned all of this shit would come back and find me there, and I figured they were in the building with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it for a few weeks. I was convinced it was either a serial killer or some guy with a porn collection that he couldn't risk having at home, or something worse on the tapes. And I went back with a friend, but when we got there, they had already started demolishing the place, and it was inaccessible. I'll always wonder what was on those tapes, but part of me is very glad that I'll never know. I recently moved into a big house, just temporarily. It's kind of a complicated situation. The house belongs to a family member. They were going to be gone for a few months, that sort of thing. I was going to be there on my own, so obviously I thought, what if it's haunted? There wasn't anything in the house when I moved in. There is now. I was in the main hallway unpacking some stuff when the doorbell rang. That put me on edge right away because the house is at the end of a long driveway and kind of out of the way. You have to go looking for it. There was an old woman at the door. This was in broad daylight, but there was still something kind of off about her. She was really tall, like a full head taller than me, and I thought there was something weird about the way she looked. It was like none of her clothes fit her properly. She took my hand and smiled really wide and told me that she was from the neighborhood council or something like that, and asked if she could come in and talk to me. My gut reaction was to say no, but I couldn't really think of a reason to. She was just an old woman. What was she going to do? I really wish I had just slammed the door in her face. I brought her into the living room, and she sort of tottered behind me, like her feet didn't fit into her shoes properly. She sat down without asking and grinned at me until I took a seat across from her. For about a half a minute, she didn't say anything, just smiled and stared at me while it got increasingly awkward. Just as I was about to break the silence, she fished in her pocket and pulled out this really big, old-fashioned sweet, the type that comes in that see-through wrapping.
"Here,"
she said.
"eat this."
I should probably point out here that she spoke really quietly, so it was difficult to hear anything she said. I accepted the sweet, kind of taken back, and unwrapped it. It was dark red, almost black. I popped it in my mouth because she was still grinning at me and nodding her head. Have you ever walked around behind a supermarket where they keep the big bins? They throw meat that's gone bad in those bins. Imagine that rancid smell, but on a hot summer day. It's so thick you can almost feel it in the air. That's what this sweet tasted like. I almost spit it out onto the floor, but wanting to be nice made me chew the thing and force it down my throat. The woman was talking all the time, but between the taste and her quiet voice, I barely heard her. My mouth tasted like rotten meat, so I politely told her I was going to go get some water and ran into the kitchen. When I came back, she was gone. I had been in the kitchen for less than 30 seconds. My first reaction probably should have been to assume that she went to the bathroom or had to leave in a hurry. Instead, I searched the entire house. I went through every single room, convinced I was going to open a closet or look under a bed and see her stuffed in there, grinning at me. That didn't happen, obviously, but I was still extremely on edge as the sun started to go down. I felt like I was turning off the light in my bedroom after spotting a giant spider in there. That night, I propped a chair against my bedroom door because I just couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still in the house somewhere, hiding. I woke up at around 2 in the morning and heard creaking floorboards downstairs. It was an old house and unfamiliar. I kept telling myself that until the noises stopped. When I woke up the next morning, there was a red sweet on the living room table. I'll tell you the same thing I told the police. No, I can't be absolutely certain that the sweet wasn't there the day before. Maybe I had just overlooked it, but I didn't think so. They told me that the organization the woman claimed to come from didn't actually exist, and clearly thought I was wasting their time. After they left, I searched the entire house again, and then the grounds. Then I searched them again. By the time I was finished, I had managed to calm down a bit and looked at the situation rationally. The woman probably left the suite there the previous day, and I just didn't notice. I had searched the whole house twice now. There was nowhere she could possibly be hiding. She was probably just some doddery old lady who wandered off while I was in the kitchen. As I prepared to go to bed, I had managed to fully delude myself into thinking nothing strange was going on. I decided not to do anything childish like blocking my door, because what was I afraid of? Even if she somehow was still inside the house somewhere, what was she going to do? At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly, knowing in the back of my mind that something was wrong. I guess I must have heard something in my sleep. I turned over onto my side and reached out to turn on the bedside lamp, groping around because I was in an unfamiliar room. When the light came on, I saw the old woman standing right next to my bed. I only got a glimpse of her because as soon as I screamed, she scuttled backward out of the door really fast. I only got the briefest glimpse of her before she vanished into the unlit hallway outside my door. I now believe that the human brain has a special compartment for dealing with experiences far outside of the realm of the natural. If I had woken up to find a burglar in my room, I probably would have gone numb with panic. If there was a lion at the foot of my bed, I would have been too paralyzed with fear to do anything. But as soon as the woman was gone, that special compartment took over. I jumped out of bed and slammed the door shut, then shoved a chair up against the handle, and then dashed for my phone. No signal. No internet. I later found out there was nothing wrong with the phone or the local service. I think that she was interfering with it somehow. The drop from the bedroom window wasn't too high. If I landed just right, I would probably avoid injury. But what if I sprained an ankle or broke my leg? I had a sudden vision of pulling myself across the dark garden while the woman sprinted after me, and decided I didn't want to risk it. That gave me two options: wait out the night in my bedroom, or try to get out of the house now. I went for the second one. I was thinking that my flimsy barricade wouldn't hold if the woman decided she wanted back in. I broke one of the chair legs off and crept slowly into the hallway, reaching carefully for the light switch. When I pressed it, the lights came on for a second and then faded out. I flicked the switch a few more times. Nothing. Some gut instinct told me she was sabotaging them somehow. I used my phone for light as I slowly, quietly crept along the upstairs hallway and down the stairs. The light barely traced the shapes of the walls and the dark, yawning frames of open doorways. I jumped at every single shadow and unidentifiable shape, certain that at any second that grinning face would appear out of the shadows. I got downstairs and to the front door. I had double locked it and put the chain in place. Just as I was reaching for the first lock, I heard rapid, uneven footsteps at the top of the stairs, approaching swiftly. I undid the first lock. A high-pitched shriek came from halfway down the stairs, and I screamed as I undid the second lock and wrenched the door open. It stuck fast. I had forgotten the chain. I glanced behind me and saw the tall, spindly shape of the woman half running, half falling down the stairs toward me, her head lolling backward and her mouth hanging open. I can't even remember getting the chain off. I might actually have just yanked the door open so hard I broke it. In any case, the last I saw of the woman was her face, inches away from me, as I slammed the door shut. I sprinted to the nearest house and eventually they called the police, possibly because I was half delirious with fear and babbling incoherently. The police once again failed to find anything unusual. It's been a week. I'm staying at a friend's place, sleeping with the lights on and the bedroom door barricaded. The house's real owners aren't back yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to tell them, but I have to stop them from going back there, somehow. This isn't a haunting. It's an infestation. I can't stop thinking about all of the holes in our defenses, the windows and doors left open, the strangers invited into our living rooms. I just hope to God it's the house that she wanted, and not me.
About the time I was 17 or so, a few friends and I were out at the beach making dry ice bombs in the middle of the night, probably midnight or so. We were quite delinquent back then, and there were about 5 or 6 of us, and we were just chilling and having a good time, trying to make potholes in the ground with dry ice bombs in the sand. It was quite a foggy night, which isn't quite unusual, considering I live on the northwest coast of Oregon, and it rains here 300 days out of the year. After 30 minutes or so of being rambunctious teenagers, we decided to walk down the beach a bit. After probably 15 minutes of walking, we hear a strange scratching/grinding sound and stop and listen. No sooner than 20 seconds later, a tall figure emerges from the fog, adjacent to the ocean, but between us and the ocean. He had to have been at least 8 feet tall, and was dragging a chain. Not your average chain, but a massive chain that looked like it was used for an anchor. The rings were probably around 8 to 12 inches long apiece, and they looked to be at least an inch in diameter as well. Now this chain wasn't short by any means, it was probably 40 to 50 feet long, and this dude was just dragging it in the sand behind him, in the middle of the night. We sat there silently, and I got the biggest shiver down my spine, and all my hair stood on end, and my breath seemed to escape me. We gathered watching the figure cross our path and make its way up the beach, and the chain slowly faded out of sight. What the hell, I thought? We then continued back down the beach to a shipwreck called the Peter Erdale, which is all but eroded now, and took in the cool sea spray and enjoyed the ominous whooshing of the serene ocean waves. We toss a couple of dry ice bombs in the water and head back to our car, where we were parked probably half a mile up the shore. As we're walking, we hear the noise again. My heart thumps, and I get the cold sweats. And it was that thing again, trudging that goddamn chain up the beach. It had to have been in the exact same place I saw it the first time. There were no drag marks in front of him, no footsteps, no indication that anyone had been on the sand. The sand was dry, and it wasn't being washed over by the waves. We watched it for a moment out of curiosity, to try and figure out what the actual hell was going on. We stood there dumbfounded, watching the figure trudge through the sand, with its unfathomably massive chain dragging behind it. Then, it stopped dragging the Satan chain, and stared directly at us, piercing our souls and the essence of our being. We stood there, jaw dropped, staring back at the shadowy figure. It began to march slowly towards us, and we decided to book it through the sand. I have never ran so fast in my life. We all pile in the car and floor it out of there, easily hitting 80 miles an hour on the straight stretch of road across. I never saw the shadowy figure again. It was the strangest, most heart-wrenching, horrifying thing that I've ever experienced. None of us were on any drugs. We were all straight-edge kids, clean as a whistle. A week or so later, a friend of ours who wasn't there told us that people used to practice black magic on the dunes there, and there were some artifacts of demonology and inverted crosses scattered about. I called bullshit on his accusations of such occurrences. This happened to me personally about 15 years ago, when I was a Girl Scout. We were staying at a campground this year, and one of the rules imposed upon us was that it was mandatory that we have a buddy as part of a buddy system, which meant that you were always supposed to have someone with you if you left the group, anytime, day or night. We spent the day doing activities at the campground, and when we all went to bed, I remember the cabin smelling very musty, and none of the girls liked it. I think it's one of the reasons why I had a lot of trouble sleeping. The smell would overcome me in waves and make me feel uneasy. When I finally did manage to fall asleep though, I remember being awoken by my buddy in the bunk underneath. She tapped me several times on the shoulder, but it wasn't until she poked my face that I truly woke up. I was a little annoyed, but she said that she needed to go to the toilet, and as it was an annex to our cabin, I had to walk with her to make sure that she got back safely. Still groggy, I agreed, and was just ascending the ladder when I saw her walk towards the door. I threw on my slippers to catch up with her, as I didn't want her to get in trouble for me not being together if an adult happened to be awake. I caught up to her just as she was opening the store door, and I stood at the door of the restroom waiting patiently, hoping that all she needed was a pee, as I was still quite tired. I waited. After about a minute, I asked if everything was okay. She shouted back that she wouldn't be long, so I continued waiting. At least 15 minutes go by, and my buddy is still in the stall. I was getting rather impatient now, and I banged on the door, but this time there was no reply. I waited in silence for her to say something, but nothing. This is the point where I start to get worried, thinking that something must have happened. Perhaps she fainted, or maybe just fell asleep. Thinking it was the latter, I bend down under the door of the stall to see if she's okay. Oddly enough though, I didn't see anything. Not a pair of legs, not anything. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on, but being in the cold air for the last 15 minutes had woken me up, and I think that she must have been playing a prank on me of some kind. So I went into the next cubicle and stood on the toilet to look in. However, when I look down, there is no one in the cubicle. A feeling of pure dread engulfs me as the cubicle door unlocks by itself and the door slowly begins to swing open. I jump down off the toilet and I hear a disembodied voice from the next stall whisper, "I'm not your buddy." I ran all the way back to the cabin, and just when I got to my bunk, I saw my buddy fast asleep on the bed underneath. I just about shat myself, and I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I never told anyone my experience, and continued as a Girl Scout until I became a troop leader myself. It was at this point in my life, when I was a lot older, and happened to be chatting to some older scout leaders about camps and cabins in our local area for some of our troops, when all of a sudden, the same campground I had my experience at was brought up. One of the older leaders tells us that she doesn't like going to that campground, as years ago when she was young, a girl in her troop killed herself in the bathroom. This incident happened in a flat when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember this very clearly, still to this day, and it makes my spine shiver thinking about it. I had the largest bedroom in the flat. My mum had decorated the walls with pink and lavender paint, and cute little metallic swirls. I had bunk beds, glittery curtains in my window, charms, and glittery things hanging from the ceiling. Any young girl's dream. I remember getting into bed that night, and everything seemed normal at first. My room wasn't usually too dark because the moonlight shone through my window, through my glittery curtains, and trying to sleep for what seemed like a while. I don't know why, but I started to look around my room, particularly in the alcove area, in the dark corner. I couldn't focus my eyes properly for a while, but when I did, I noticed my girl's world's head, one of those plastic weird lady heads you do makeup and style her hair on, really stood out in the moonlight against the creepy dark corner. I remember going to lay back down in my bed, but I had the urge to look back, and when I did, I was paralyzed with fear. At first I thought I might be imagining it, because I had been staring at a plastic lady head, but I swear, I saw this dark, woman-like outline standing right there, next to the head. It was a dark grey black mist, but in the shape of a woman. I slowly looked at her, or it, with its massive bulging eyes, scanning down, and saw that she had no feet. There was nothing there. No shadow, no feet, nothing. She, or it, was levitating about 10 inches off the ground, and it seemed like she was moving towards me. I was absolutely terrified and will always remember this because of how cripplingly scary it was. I was in shock, and I quickly spun around in bed and curled into the fetal position, with my quilt tightly wrapped around me. I made sure the quilt was tightly containing my neck and head, and can I add that there were no labels or anything that could have emulated what happened next. I was shaking and trying not to breathe loudly when I felt something stand behind me, leaning over me. I closed my eyes and gripped the quilt tight when all of a sudden I felt a tickle on the back of my neck. You know the feeling you get when someone unexpectedly puts their cold fingers on the back of your neck? It started off like that and became quickly more aggressive, tightening around the back of my neck, as if someone was trying to keep a hold of me. I was trying to scream, but no words came out. I was sweating and shaking, and my neck was getting worse. It was hurting. I tried screaming over and over, but all that came out were little squeaks. It was like gasping for air. I remember the moment when I was finally able to scream for my mother. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but it came out crackled, like a blood-curdling cry for help. She came running in, and as soon as she flung open the door, and that burst of light shone through the room, the whole thing stopped. My mum grabbed me out of bed and carried me to the front room cradling, as I sobbed hysterically. To this day she still believes me, and said that even though she has never personally experienced anything paranormal, there was no way I would lie about what I saw, nor my reaction. From then on I slept in my mum's bed for a while, and we moved out shortly after. I'm grateful we haven't needed to go back since. I worked in a dementia unit of a retirement home for a while, and I can tell you that it was by far one of the most interesting jobs I've ever had. It was sad in many ways, of course, but I think what some people don't understand is that we'd never known about our residents before the Alzheimer's or Lewy body or whatever. We just know and care for them as they are. Even some of the most advanced cases are able to demonstrate that they are unique individuals who enjoy life and need love and belonging like everyone else. That said, strange things happened every day. I'd say the strangest and most unnerving would be what happened with a resident that I will call Nancy. Nancy had very advanced Alzheimer's, to the point where we had not heard her say a word beyond incoherent mumbling for about 6 to 8 months. Every day, she would just pace the halls until it was time for bed, as pacing is a very common behaviour with moderate to advanced dementia. In Nancy's case, she pretty much never stops unless we made her come and eat something. We would commonly try to walk and talk with her, just to keep her stimulated, but she would hardly even look at us, just pace. Nancy had a husband that also lived in the community. This home had a section for dementia separate from a normal assisted living facility. Her husband Wayne lived in this other section. He would visit his wife every day until he himself became so sick he was confined to his room. When this happened, we started to grow worried. Even though it sometimes doesn't seem like it, frequent visitors make a big difference to even our most advanced cases. Nancy and Wayne had been married for over 60 years. It was undoubtable that even through her disease, Nancy still received some comfort through Wayne's visits. I suppose we need not have worried. Wayne died early one morning. We, as well as most dementia care units, have a policy that prohibits bringing negative energy where it would not do any good. So Nancy was not supposed to be told of Wayne's death. Later that day though, during her usual pacing, Nancy stopped, stared into the upper corner of the room for several minutes, and then all of a sudden started screaming. Now this isn't as alarming as it may seem. There was a lot of screams happening all the time in dementia units, but it made all the staff come to see what was wrong. She abruptly stopped screaming, and I swear by everything I hold dear, she started repeating her husband's name. Wayne, 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 over and over. Keep in mind she had not said the smallest word in almost a year. I got up to touch her on the arm and ask her gently if everything's okay. Nancy looked straight at me, which was also very abnormal for her, and she says, "He's bothering me. Tell him to leave me alone," then goes back to staring into the upper corner of the room. Half of the staff just nope out of there, whilst the rest of us tried to get her distracted by giving her a snack and a different activity. From that day on, she started talking again. Nothing lengthy, but she would occasionally start to talk to either us or herself. Many times she referenced someone called Grandpa, and started speaking to him in an otherwise empty room. While this isn't an uncommon thing for our residents to do, the fact that it did not start until the exact day her husband died still gives me serious creeps. So, my house is on the biggest chunk of property in the tri-state area, and is about 108 acres, and was originally kind of a park, but wasn't supposed to be used as a park. Unfortunately, people from all over didn't get the memo that we had moved in, and therefore continued to party, hunt and fish wherever they felt like. Over the years, the problems began to go away, except for a couple. Before we talk about the perpetrators, or at least the leader, we should discuss what was behind the property. An asylum, mostly housing psychopaths, schizophrenics, and those who had suffered mental breakdowns. It isn't rare to hear random screaming for no reason coming from over there. Anyway, there were 4 men who kept coming back and hunting in the middle of the night. We let some people hunt in there on Saturday nights, but for the most part, hunting was off limit. We were never able to catch these 4 middle-aged men, who always wore masks. I mention that because the leader always wore a creative mask, an especially frightening one. Most of the time, he donned a pig mask. These men were sneaky, they were smart, and that's what made them so terrifying. I had 3 encounters with them, the first being in June of last year. A few friends and I had decided to go on an adventure through the woods, and we discovered something frightening. We found a fortress covered in beer cans with a chair at the top. Being teenagers, we decided to do the smart thing, which was to destroy all of the hunters' hard work by kicking the entire fortress down. Boy, had we messed up. We later returned to that fortress to check up on it, and that's when it got scary. It was rebuilt, almost as a shrine to the last one, and spray painted on the ground was, "Try that again. We dare you." The second encounter happened during a simple walk at night. Sometimes when I got upset, I liked to take walks through the woods. This time was at night, and it just so happened that our favourite hunters were out hunting. I was walking along minding my own business, when I see the man in the pig mask, and he sees me. He now knows my face, and I hear a deep laugh as he turns his gun towards me. I have no idea what he's planning, but I booked it out of there ASAP, so that I didn't have to figure out what. This is my third encounter, and it was the most blood-curdling. It occurred only a few weeks ago, and I was walking home from my cousin's house in the dark. I had my flashlight shining, and I felt safe, but something was off. The barn lights were on. The barn lights are never on. No one ever goes in the barn. The floors are falling through, so I simply brushed it off as a technical error. But then, in the middle of the field, I saw the man with the pig mask, and he saw me. And his words have haunted my dreams since he yelled them at me. "You get the hell out of here before I make you." The way he said it, the intonation of every word. It was angry, so vicious, dead set on revenge. I haven't been in the woods since then. It was later discovered, the barn, they had been setting up shop there for some time. They haven't been found yet, and I doubt they ever will. This happened over a decade ago. I was living alone in a ground floor apartment. I had gone to bed for the evening, but was never a good sleeper, so laying down around 12 and getting to sleep around 2 was pretty good. I had been actually asleep when I was jolted awake by a sudden crash from the next room, which was the kitchen. My apartment was the kind in a large open complex where the doors opened to the outside. Not a big building, and it was in a nice neighborhood. Very quiet, especially at night. There was usually nothing I could hear from my bedroom, so the crash just ripped through complete silence. I had 2 cats, and at first I assumed that they were chasing each other around and had knocked something over. So I started to get up to scold them. But I couldn't pull the blankets back, because they were both laying on it, huddled together against my hip, terrified. Huge dilated eyes, ears pinned flat back, puffed up like they'd been electrocuted. These were adult animals that had moved thousands of miles with me and lived in all kinds of situations, with huge dogs and third shift workers and all kinds of commotions. They were not easily frightened, and I have never seen them like this before or since. That bothered me more than the noise. Anyway, as disturbed as I was actually angrier that I had been disturbed from a restful sleep, and I got up to investigate without a thought for safety. Unarmed and nearly naked, I marched across the room and the hall up to the kitchen in the dark, and then I flipped on the light. I almost wish I had found a burglar. My kitchen was small. The sink was opposite the stove, and there was about 8 feet between them. I kept a dish drainer rack sat on the folded dishcloth next to the sink, snugged back against the wall. When I went to bed that night, there had been a ceramic bowl, a couple pieces of silverware, and a plastic food storage container in it. Now, it and all of its contents were scattered at the foot of the stove, the bowl broken. The dish towel had only made halfway and lay directly in the center of the kitchen floor. I can still see it in my mind like a photograph. The dish drainer had launched itself or been thrown or shoved clearly across the kitchen, and with some considerable force. The crash that I heard was it hitting the stove, probably still full as the bowl looked like it broke when it hit the floor, right there at the base of the oven. I wasn't angry anymore, Now I was just confused and suddenly very aware of how late it was, and that I had to try and get up for work in the morning. I picked up the disc rack and set it on the counter nearest where I stood in the entryway, collected the rest of the mess and heaped it up inside the rack, shut the light and returned to my bed. The cats were still huddled and looked to have regained command of themselves. I remember laying down and falling back into fitful sleep for a few hours before waking up in the morning, hoping that I had dreamed the whole thing. I found the disc rack and the mess right where I'd left it, of course. I was raised to be very skeptical in a secular blue-collar household, where ascribing strange things to the supernatural was considered lazy and childish. I still feel that way, and I'm sure there's some rational explanation for this, but I've never been able to come up with one. Neither have the few people I've told it to. Nothing like this ever happened to me as a child, and I don't remember even hearing about it from old people in my family about anything unexplained or spooky or mysterious. I'll never forget the way my cats looked towards the kitchen when they heard the crash. I've long since given up actually trying to figure it out. But if you have anything to add, I'm certainly listening. This happened when I was 14-15. My school has an option. If it's too far for you to travel to school, you can always just stay in the hostel. You pay a certain amount monthly, and on alternate weekends, they'll let you go off to see your parents. So this is an all-girls school, and we experienced change of guard a lot after our previous guard passed away. The late guard was a nice chap, and acted more like a grandfather to us. He was in his late 50s and early 60s, bringing us food from his wife and candies, until one day, a man in his 30s took the guard's post, after quite some time from the hostel being without one. The new guard was a bit off. There are times when he would walk past our study room, and stand by the window staring at us. Other times, he'd stay outside the gate near the shower room smoking ciggies. It creeped us out a little, but we didn't really do much, as the wardens were also wary that we wouldn't be able to get a new guard if they fired him, so he stayed. Whenever he was around, we got uncomfortable. We would usually just close the door to the room we were in, so that he couldn't peer inside. Fast forward a few months, our panties started to go missing. We have this place right behind our hostel block that's allocated for us to hang our laundry, to air and dry it. Some girls would soak their clothes in softener for the night and leave their clothes, including panties, in a pail in the laundry room. So next day we wake up and all of our panties would be missing. It went on for a few weeks and we started getting anxious about the missing panties. It came to a point where a few girls were left with only one pair. They had to give their parents an emergency call to buy them more and send it to the hostel. Our wardens were getting anxious too. We alerted the school and the local enforcement, but nothing was being done. We were left on our own. One weekend, 2 girls went behind the guardhouse to get some cleaning stuff. We cleaned up part of the hostel on alternate weekends when we didn't have outings, and noticed a large garbage bag. They left it untouched at first, but when they returned to put back the brooms and mops, one girl got curious to find out what was in the bag and decided to take a look. Inside, there were heaps of our missing panties. Both girls freaked out when they saw the young guard coming towards them and yelling some profanities and asked them not to touch the bag. They both ran towards the main hostel building straight to our warden's room. Our wardens were both alarmed and called the police straight away. Then, armed with a few burly girls, who happened to be hockey players with their sticks in hand, went looking for him. The guard, however, managed to get away on his motorcycle. But a few days later the police caught him snooping around our hostel when it was almost lights off. Turned out he had been a repeated sex offender caught a few times being a flasher around schools in the city. We were all relieved to have him locked away in jail, but also upset that our school had been so careless in hiring a guard for the hostel. Our parents demanded a PTA emergency meeting and decided that the next one they hired had to be approved through the PTA first. It was scary to imagine that this guy had the keys to almost all rooms in the hostel except for the dorms, where only a dorm leader is allowed to have the key. But imagine what nasty things he could do if two girls didn't discover those missing panties. After all, this man had been entrusted to guard us from harm, but he turned out to be the danger lurking around. I still have shivers down my spine when I think of him.
So I work at a pizza place, usually inside, as my insurance doesn't cover claims when driving for business. But occasionally, I will cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers because the money is pretty good. Our delivery area includes a few new development, upper middle class, cookie cutter neighborhoods, an older 1940s era village, 2 apartment complexes, some trailer parks, and a bunch of rural areas. Not rural to the point seeing hundreds of stars at night, but enough that you probably couldn't hear your neighbors yell. So, about a week ago, I was covering a delivery shift. I come back to the shop feeling pretty good. I'm averaging $5 a delivery, and they have all been pretty close, and check to see if I have any more. I have one to an address I've never seen before. We have mostly semi-regular deliveries, so an address that doesn't seem the least bit familiar is odd. It's out on one of the more rural roads. I asked the kid who took the order what was up, because there were special instructions on the ticket. He says, they said go around back because the front door isn't operational. I'm like, okay, that's not that uncommon. People often want you to go around back. Either they painted the door, the house shifted and it's a bitch to open, or they're just hanging out back. So, as I'm driving out to the house, I get this odd feeling. I don't really like the idea of going to the back of some house out in the sticks. It would all be too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house. There are quite a few in the more rural areas. And then jump the delivery guy. I figure I'll scope the place out when I get there, and if it seems sketchy, I'll just call them and make up some bull about how it's against company policy to go around the back of houses to prevent robberies. As I'm driving to the house, I realize it's towards the end of this road that gets less populated the further down you go. Great. I'm pretty close to the address and driving slow. I see this abandoned-looking house set back from the road with no address and surrounded by a bunch of trees. I think, that house better not be it. So I drive past and check the next house's address, and lo and behold, that abandoned-looking one was the right house. At this point, I'm not super worried though, because out in the boonies, the standards of upkeep on your house are pretty low, so a house in disrepair isn't unusual. So I double back to this house and pull into the driveway. At this point, I'm getting bad vibes. It just doesn't seem right. So I park my car at the very end of the driveway with the rear of the car on the shoulder so anyone passing by can clearly see it. I call back to the shop and tell them I'm at this sketchy house, and if I don't call back in 4 or 5 minutes, call me, and if I don't answer, call the cops. While I'm on the phone, I take a chance to get a good look at the house. It looks extremely abandoned, and not just in disrepair. The driveway is crumbling, bits of gravel, and there are weeds growing out of it. There's no mailbox, no trash cans, no car, no lawnmowers, no landscaping, kids' toys, absolutely nothing in the yard. The yard hasn't been mowed in what looks like years. The house is total crap. The roof is all but falling apart. The siding is falling apart. The back deck, which comes around the side, is falling apart. The only part of the house that looks even a little bit decent is the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows are all shut. It's 95 degrees and humid, and this place doesn't have an AC. They all have the blinds or curtains shut. The few that aren't are actually boarded up. I don't even see any wires running to this house. It's not dark, but it's dusk, and there isn't a sign of any lights on. At this point, I'm starting to get pretty nervous. I'm a 5 foot 10 inch male, 180 pounds, not in any great shape, but I did take karate for 10 years, so I'm not helpless. But I do try to avoid any sort of confrontation I can, as I am mostly a pacifist. I'm not too concerned about getting robbed. No skin off my teeth, it's not my money. I mean, I would rather not get robbed, but I'm mostly worried about getting jumped or killed. It's a fairly safe area, but recently, there have been some rather unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies, but more worrying, a few stabbings and assaults. So, it's time to either nut up or shut up. I'm not just going to go charging in there like a fool, so I get out my phone and call the number they gave me when ordering. While I'm doing that, I'm also getting the pizza out and making sure to leave my door open. A running car, half in the road in an abandoned house with the door open looks suspicious, right? Not that there is really any traffic this far down the road, though. I'm starting to walk up to the house while the phone's ringing. It rings twice, and then an automated message comes on. It says something along the lines of, "This phone is associated with the internet texting app, one of the free ones you download, that lets you send free text from a different phone number over a data connection. I think it was haywire. We've had some issues with people using numbers from those services for pranks in the past. This is a huge red flag. My heart is now pounding in my throat, and my whole body is telling me to bail." So, I'm just standing there holding a pizza, looking at this house, but not wanting to venture around to the back of it. I'm hoping that the resident will look out the window and come out by the road to get their food. So I'm looking at the front windows, checking for any signs of life. I see a blind go up on the one window next to the front door, and a really creepy looking guy with a hat pulled low and big sunglasses is looking out. Remember, he is in a completely dark house surrounded by trees, at dusk. There is no reason for him to be wearing sunglasses. I also see what appears to be a big guy standing behind him in the room. This could have been anything, though. When he sees me looking, he mouths something and darts away, presumably toward the allegedly broken front door. I had stayed pretty close to my car, so it was only a few steps away, and I jumped into the driver's seat and threw the pizza into my passenger seat, something I would never usually do, since I'm really anal about keeping my car clean. I slam it into reverse before I get the clutch all the way in, so I grind my gears a little, again, something I never do. Without looking, I simultaneously slam and lock my door, and floor it backwards onto the main road, slipping my clutch horribly, but at this point I don't care. I didn't even check for cross traffic, really stupid on my part. I start to drive away and look back at the house. The screen door on the outside of the front door is now open, but the front door is still shut. The guy isn't out in the front yard yelling, "Wait, come back," or anything. He's just gone. So I pull over a little ways up the road to call back to the shop and tell them that I'm all good, and I'll elaborate when I get back. The people never call back to inquire about their food. People usually call if their pizza is 15 minutes late, and these people never got it, so it's really strange they didn't call, pretty much confirming they were up to no good. After telling my coworkers about it, we conclude it was definitely a robbery at the very least. So we put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list and ate their pizza. I doubt I would have actually gotten murdered or anything. Robbed, with maybe a gun pulled, or a little roughing up, yes, but it was still very unnerving. That I easily could have gotten into some serious trouble by just doing my job. Especially if the idiots picked a slightly less abandoned house to set up at. Anyone who delivers pizza should be wary of situations like this. I looked into it, and apparently, it's a pretty common way to rob pizza guys. At our department, we had fairly strict policies regarding how we handled 911 calls that were either missed dials or dead air. We always sent 2 officers out to the address to ascertain why and how the call was made. Our state had a database of this information and put out statistics every year. Additionally, it was a fairly useful deterrent against the kids who loved prank calling and the old folks who called dispatch just to have someone to talk to. We were a fairly small county. This particular case involved some fairly strange 911 calls in a newer subdivision in our county. Shortly after I began working as a deputy in early 2001, real estate developers began to build expensive housing in a newly cut subdivision that ran against one of the larger creeks in our county. Seemingly overnight, a huge wooded area turned into 800K plus housing. At night, myself and another deputy would go on foot patrol through the new subdivision. It was a way to kill time on slow nights, and another way to fulfill our curiosity about how big these houses really were. However, there was one larger, Victorian-style 2-story house that overlooked the river that we typically did a quick patrol through and got the hell out of there. I could never put my finger on it, but I always had a feeling of uneasiness whenever we walked on the property and through the home as it was under construction. The other deputy, a good friend of mine, always told me that the shadows were watching him when we walked through that house. We jokingly called the house Marilyn Manson's crib. We never felt weird in any other location inside the subdivision. Months passed, and most of the subdivision was complete by early summer. People began to move in, and all shifts at the sheriff's department began to patrol the area. However, the house that I felt strange in had seemingly come to a construction standstill. From talking to the general contractor, the real estate company had 3 potential buyers for the home, but they all backed out for various reasons. Now, this wasn't uncommon due to the high prices and uncertainty over property taxes, but something in my mind just didn't add up. After speaking to some of the subcontractors involved, it seemed like the potential buyers toured the property and noped out of the deal as quick as possible. Around December 2001, a buyer was finally found for the house, but the closing had to be delayed to finalize some utility issues. About 2 weeks before the new owners closed on the home, our dispatch received a 911 call from the home with dead air. I was on shift that night and took lead while another deputy headed my way. I went over to our secondary radio channel and began asking a ton of questions to our dispatcher about the nature of the call. All she could advise was she was getting dead air. The callback number was showing all 6s, 666, 666, 6666, and the address was showing to be the creepy house in the new subdivision. I found this quite odd, as the general contractor had sent our department the house numbering for this particular street a couple days before the call. I figured our dispatch supervisor had updated our 911 system to reflect these new addresses. When I rolled up on the house, it was completely dark. I stayed in my patrol vehicle and hit the house with my spotlight while I waited for backup to arrive. Nothing was found out of the ordinary, and no signs of vandalism were discovered. However, the entire time I was there, I felt a heaviness that I can only describe as someone pushing down on my shoulders and weighing me down. We closed the call out as unfounded. After we cleared, I let our patrol sergeant know what was going on. He felt that it was an error with the 911 system and stated we needed to inform the day shift dispatch supervisor. The next morning, I notified our dispatch supervisor about the error and was met with a perplexed look. She proceeded to tell me that this was impossible because the utility company had not run phone service to any of the houses in that part of the subdivision yet. Apparently, this was a utility issue that was preventing closing for the homeowners. She stated that she was waiting until the end of the week to update the 911 system to reflect the new addresses, as it'd be a waste of time to load in new addresses with no telephone service. Thus, the address could not have appeared in our computer-aided dispatch system. I believed our dispatch supervisor on her assessment. She had been with the county for 10 plus years, seen the 911 system designed and implemented, and generally did a very good job. So, I took her at her word, which unsettled me even more. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, I passed it on to the day sergeant and asked if one of the deputies could follow up with the phone company if they were out working near that house. Later that evening, I found a note in my patrol box that stated, "The phone company is working on the lines in a different part of the subdivision. They won't be working on that address until later this week. The phone company doesn't know what's causing the 911 issue. Maybe dispatch got the address wrong." That night, dispatch received another 911 call with dead air from the same house, a seemingly impossible address included. Once again, we responded and found nothing out of the ordinary. The deputy that responded with me that night told me afterward that he felt like he was being watched the entire time we checked the perimeter of the home. I still felt the heaviness when walking around. The next morning, the patrol sergeant and I both spoke with the dispatch supervisor and basically told her the impossible was occurring and we needed to get to the bottom of it. She pulled the records from the night before and, sure enough, the impossible address was being sent from some unknown phone lines to our 911 system, which propagated out to the dispatch operator's CAD and our in-car computers. By that evening, we all received an email from the dispatch supervisor stating that she had no idea how this was happening and believed it to be a glitch that she corrected in the 911 system. However, she added the new addresses anyway, since the phone company was almost done working in the area. Basically, she had no clue what was causing the problem. We started getting nightly 911 calls to the house. Our patrol sergeant finally told dispatch that we wouldn't be responding until the buyers moved in. In some weird way, this made me feel much better. I absolutely hated responding to that house. The next week, on one of my nights off, I heard on my radio that the patrol sergeant on a differential shift told two deputies to get to the bottom of what was going on at that house. Apparently, he believed that kids were somehow tampering with the phone system and just trying to waste the county's time. Bored and somewhat curious, I called the patrol sergeant on his cell phone and asked if the 911 call came in with dead air, like it had for us multiple times. He said that this particular call was downright creepy. Dispatch answered the call, and it sounded like someone was either gagged or the phone was completely muffled. Apparently, the person on the other end of the line sounded like they were in distress and sounded like they were talking at a rapid pace. Now, at this point, the new owner still had not moved into the house and, as far as I know, had not connected the phone service. Like all the other times before, the deputies got on scene, checked the perimeter, and looked through the house to the best of their abilities, and found nothing. However, one of them mentioned feeling unusually cold when walking near the back of the property. I talked with him later, as this was fairly strange since he was the only one who felt it, and our average temperature at night in December hovers a little above 55 degrees. The deputy who reported the coldness was directed by the sergeant to park in front of the house for a couple of hours to look out for anything suspicious. Apparently, he lasted about another hour and a half before throwing up about 6 or 7 times on the side of the road, and then took off for the evening. I talked with him about this experience a couple of days later, and he stated he felt fine after he left the area. However, he said the longer he was near the house, the sicker he felt. Anecdotal at best, but it still creeped me out. A few weeks passed. The new homeowners, a husband, wife, and 2 kids, moved in, stayed less than 3 months, and put the home on the market at a fairly substantial loss. We received numerous 911 calls from them, ranging from prowlers in the area to break-ins with a suspect still in the residence. Now, the calls were coming from the alarm company instead of the homeowners themselves. Apparently, they installed a fairly high-end security system with motion sensors that called the security company after the owners armed the system in the master bedroom before going to sleep. 8 out of 10 calls we received were for motion sensor activation alarms. I probably responded a total of 20 times in 3 months to the house. I think the alarm company was out there almost as many times, but could never find a defect in the system. The husband was continually traveling for business, leaving the wife and kids at home for the better part of the 3 months they lived there. The wife was absolutely convinced the house was haunted. Based on the contact I had with the wife, I tended to believe her. She was well educated, very articulate, and her description of shadows moving scared the hell out of me, as it was eerily similar to what my friend encountered. In fact, my deputy friend, who often responded to the calls with me, made it known to the wife that he saw something similar before the house's construction was complete. I still jokingly blame him for costing that family a ton of money after they got the hell out of there. Before the family moved, we encouraged them to get with the alarm company and install cameras that activated with the alarm system to see if they could record what was causing the motion sensors to activate and call the alarm company. However, they never did. I think the wife's persistence got to the husband, and he sold the house just to get her to stop talking about it. During the last month they were there, our sheriff felt it necessary to send an off-duty deputy to sit outside the residence on more than 3 occasions, just to ease the mind of the wife. Each time, a different deputy was sent. All of them reported feeling strange while on assignment, but no one reported seeing anything suspicious. Since the first family left, that house was owned by at least 12 different families since 2002. We kept getting 911 calls that were either from the alarm company or dead air for as long as I worked at the apartment. Most owners didn't stay more than a year and a half. I think most of them stayed there just long enough to sell the house at a reasonable price to the next poor, unsuspecting buyer. I particularly felt bad for the family who got stuck with the house during the housing crisis of 2008. I can't stress how strange this is, as the majority of the original owners in the subdivision continue to live there, and we rarely got any calls from them. This encounter is secondhand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I'm a natural skeptic, so I can't say I 100% believe it, but his telling of it is pretty simple and didn't vary between retellings. I've known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well reasoned and always helpful, so I'll just take his word on it, even if with a grain of salt. So let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle, and a .45 caliber sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country, on a vast property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission in the works. This happened close to Kisachee National Forest in south central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. It's safe to say, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep, and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So, he made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. It's now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first, and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise, and saw a man approaching through the trees, several yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as most often, most people he comes across are armed as well. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation. So, one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is that he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And secondly, this guy's not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or really anything. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was early fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana. So there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects aplenty. You're definitely not going to have most of your skin exposed in the deep woods if you can help it. I know this all too well from personal experience. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" Pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, is standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, finally speaks and says clearly, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, and because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying help me, or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still not moving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic, but really just louder. Marv said this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the inflection of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to move. The guy, still standing motionless and still looking directly at him, repeated the phrase another 3 times. Marv, now totally unsure what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy. "Alright, do you need my help or not?" He continued loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the help me's again, and took another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45. The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming that he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. This is where it gets fully batshit crazy, as the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips, like gymnasts do, back into the woods, and immediately out of sight. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood, and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly, as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set, and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. And when he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he, or it, and I heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. He, or it didn't give any indication to follow or say anything else. Marvin's been back to the property since, with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing, during the early morning of the first night, what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his 45. He thought that he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole Kissichee area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore, not to mention mimics and other similar creatures. A lot of his encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained.